A man's ultimate betrayal can be the key that unlocks his wife's greatest secret. Richard Blackwood, a self-made millionaire, believed he had everything. A booming company, a beautiful mistress, and a quiet, unassuming wife at home. To celebrate a new deal, he whisks his mistress away to a secluded multi-million-dollar coastal mansion for a weekend of decadence. He thinks it's the perfect stage to flaunt his power and success. But what happens when the foundation of his entire world is a lie meticulously built by the very woman he's betraying? Prepare for a story where the walls have ears, the staff serves a different master, and the price of arrogance is absolute ruin. Richard Blackwood lived a life sculpted from polished granite and shimmering glass. His office on the 54th floor of a Chicago skyscraper offered a god's-eye view of the city, a panorama he felt he had personally tamed. At 45, he had the sharp jawline, the custom-tailored Tom Ford suits, and the Patek Philippe watch that screamed success. His company Blackwood Capital was his kingdom built on aggressive acquisitions and what he liked to call visionary disruption. His wife Eleanor was in his eyes the perfect accessory to this life. She was elegant in a quiet, understated way, the kind of woman who managed their sprawling Lincoln Park brownstone with serene efficiency. She hosted his business dinners with grace, remembered the names of his associates' children, and never questioned his late nights at the office. He saw her as beautiful, dependable, and simple. She was his calm harbor, the soft focus background to his high-definition life. He loved her, of course, in the way a man loves a comfortable, familiar chair. But comfort was not passion. Passion was Lana Rossi. Lana was everything Eleanor was not. She was a fiery art gallery curator, 28 years old, with eyes that devoured everything they saw, and a laugh that could fill a room. She was ambition and desire wrapped in a Chanel dress. She didn't just admire Richard's success. She celebrated it, reveled in it, made him feel like the king he believed himself to be. Their affair was a whirlwind of Michelin-starred restaurants, secret trips to the St. Regis in New York, and the thrilling electric danger of the forbidden. "You work too hard, darling," Lana murmured one evening, tracing the lapel of his jacket in the back of his chauffeured Rolls-Royce. "You closed the Apex deal. That's monumental. We need to celebrate. Properly." Richard's mind was already turning. He had been looking for an opportunity to do something truly spectacular for Lana, something that would cement his status in her eyes. A new Cartier bracelet was one thing, but an experience, that was true power. "I have something in mind," he said, a slow, self-satisfied smile spreading across his face. "A place I just found out about. Utterly private. A new property on the coast near Malibu. The Serafina Estate. It's next level. A weekend. Just us. No phones, no distractions." The Serafina Estate. Lana's eyes widened. She was well versed in the world of luxury real estate through her gallery clients. "Richard, I've heard whispers of that place. They say it's impossible to book. It's owned by some reclusive billionaire." "Are you sure?" Richard chuckled a low, confident sound. "Money isn't about buying things, Bella. It's about buying access. I made a few calls. It's handled." He didn't elaborate that the call was to a high-end concierge service that had charged him an astronomical fee to secure the booking, a fee that made even him wince. But the thought of Lana's reaction of having her in a place no one else could access was worth every penny. That night, he went home to Eleanor. She was in the library, curled up in an armchair with a thick book on quantum computing of all things. She wore simple silk pajamas, her reading glasses perched on her nose. She looked up and gave him a soft, welcoming smile. "Rough day?" she asked, her voice calm and gentle. "The usual battles," he said, loosening his tie. "I have to fly out to the coast for a last-minute investor meeting this weekend. A real emergency summit. I probably won't be reachable." It was a lie. He had practiced a variation of a theme he had used a dozen times before. Eleanor simply nodded, her expression unchanging. "Of course. Be safe. Do you need me to pack anything for you?" No. I'll have my assistant handle it," he said, already moving past her towards the bar for a glass of scotch. He felt a fleeting, minuscule pang of guilt, which he immediately smothered with a swig of the 25-year-old Macallan. He looked at her, absorbed in her book, so content in her small, quiet world. She had no idea. No idea of the thrilling, high-stakes life he led outside these walls of the woman who truly understood the titan he was. He pitied her a little for her blissful ignorance. It was, he told himself, a form of kindness. He walked over and kissed the top of her head. "Don't wait up for me this week." "I never do," she said softly, turning a page. Her words hung in the air for a moment, but Richard was already mentally composing a text to Lana. He didn't notice the book Eleanor was reading wasn't just on quantum computing. It was an advance copy of a technical journal with handwritten notes in the margins in a script that was sharp, precise, and brilliant. He didn't see the brief, calculating glint in her eyes before she returned her gaze to the complex equations on the page. He saw only what he wanted to see: his simple, dutiful wife, safely tucked away in her gilded cage. The helicopter descended like a dragonfly, its blades slicing through the crisp, salt-laced air. Below them, the Serafina estate unfolded from the rugged California cliffs. It wasn't just a house. It was a statement, a sprawling structure of white travertine stone and vast panes of glass that seemed to float between the azure sky and the turquoise Pacific. An infinity pool bled seamlessly into the horizon. Meticulously manicured gardens cascaded down the cliffs in terraces of vibrant green. Lana pressed her face against the window, her breath fogging the glass. "Richard, it's not a house. It's Olympus." Richard felt a surge of pride so potent it was almost intoxicating. "I told you, didn't I? The best. Only the best for you." As they landed on the private helipad, a man in a discreetly tailored grey suit was already waiting. He was tall and distinguished, with silvering temples and an air of quiet authority. "Mr. Blackwood, Miss Rossi, welcome to Serafina. I am Javier, the estate manager. Please allow me." He gestured towards a silent electric golf cart. As they glided down a path paved with smooth grey stones, Javier spoke in a calm, modulated voice. "Your luggage will be taken to the master suite. The culinary team has prepared some refreshments. Is there anything at all you require upon arrival?" "Just a tour of my kingdom," Richard said with a laugh, clapping Javier on the shoulder. Javier's smile didn't quite reach his eyes, but he nodded deferentially. "Of course, sir. The estate is at your disposal." The tour was a study in jaw-dropping opulence. A 2-story library with a rolling ladder, a home cinema with plush velvet seats, a wellness wing with a sauna, and a cold plunge pool, and a wine cellar behind a bank vault door that held what looked like a liquid fortune. Every surface was immaculate, every detail curated. The art on the walls was museum quality. A Rothko here, a de Kooning there. Lana was ecstatic, touching the cool marble countertops and gazing at the breathtaking views. Who owns this place? A sheikh? A tech god? Does it matter? Richard countered, pulling her close and kissing her neck. For the next 48 hours, I do. They were shown to the master suite, a space larger than their first-floor apartment. A wall of glass retracted completely, opening the room to a private balcony with a suspended daybed overlooking the ocean. The bed was enormous, dressed in linens so fine they felt like cool water against the skin. As Lana explored the cavernous walk-in closet, admiring a rack that was curiously stocked with a few women's garments, in neutral tones, Richard spoke to Javier. "The staff," Richard said, adopting his CEO tone. "I want them to be discreet. We're here for privacy. No interruptions unless I call for them." "Of course, sir," Javier replied smoothly. "Our staff is trained to be invisible. They operate under the strictest protocols of the owner." "Good. And I'll need the keys to the McLaren in the garage. I might want to take a drive down the coast tomorrow." Javier's expression flickered for a nanosecond. "The vehicles are for the owner's personal use, sir. However, we have a house car, a Range Rover with a driver at your disposal at all times." Richard's ego bristled. "I wasn't asking to borrow a car, Javier. I'm the guest. I'm paying a small fortune to be here. I expect certain amenities." "I understand completely, sir." Javier said, his tone unwavering and polite, yet carrying an unshakable finality. "My instructions on that matter are very clear. I do apologize for any inconvenience. Now, if you'll excuse me, I will have champagne sent up." He bowed slightly and left, closing the door with a soft click. "Insolent," Richard muttered under his breath. Lana came out of the closet, holding up a cream-colored cashmere shawl. "This was just hanging in here. It feels divine. Do you think the owner left it behind? Probably the cleaning staff's—" Richard scoffed, dismissing it. "Don't worry about it. Let's open the champagne." But as Lana draped the shawl over her shoulders, she caught a scent clinging to the fabric. It was faint, almost imperceptible, a sophisticated fragrance of peony and something suede-like, elegant and incredibly subtle. It was oddly familiar, but she couldn't place it. She dismissed the thought as Richard popped the cork on a bottle of vintage Dom Perignon. They spent the afternoon by the pool, the champagne flowing freely. Richard felt expansive, powerful, the master of his universe. He had Lana, this palace, the world at his feet. He glanced over at her beautiful and sun-kissed and felt a deep satisfaction. This was the life he had built, the life he deserved. Later, as the sun began to set, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and purple, Lana swam to the edge of the infinity pool, looking out at the vast expanse of the Pacific. "It's so perfect, it almost feels unreal," she said, her voice soft. "Like a set." "You know, it's real," Richard assured her, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "And it's all ours." But as he looked at the magnificent house, a flicker of Javier's polite but firm refusal about the car came back to him. There was a strange feeling, a tiny, unsettling sense that they were not masters of this place, but merely actors on a stage that belonged to someone else, someone with very clear, unbendable rules. He pushed the thought away. It was probably just the manager being overly officious. Here, with Lana in his arms and the world at his feet, nothing could possibly go wrong. The first crack appeared the next morning over breakfast on the terrace. It was a glorious spread. Exotic fruits, freshly baked pastries, eggs Benedict cooked to perfection. Richard, feeling lordly, decided he wanted something specific. "Javier," he called out, as the manager passed by overseeing the service. "This is excellent, but I have a taste for a particular coffee. Kopi Luwak. Do you have any?" Javier paused. "We have a wide selection of world-class beans, sir. We have a Jamaican Blue Mountain that is quite exceptional." "I didn't ask what you have," Richard said, his tone sharpening with impatience. "I asked if you have Kopi Luwak, if you don't send someone to get it, whatever the cost." It was a power play, a small test of his influence within these walls. "I'm afraid that won't be possible, sir," Javier replied, his voice still infuriatingly calm. "The owner has a very specific, ethically sourced list of purveyors. Kopi Luwak is not on it. We are not permitted to serve it on the premises." Richard stared at him dumbfounded. He was being denied a cup of coffee. "You're telling me in a place like this I can't get a specific type of coffee?" "I am saying we can't procure it for you, sir. The owner's instructions are absolute. My apologies." Javier bowed slightly and moved on, leaving Richard fuming in silence. Lana tried to lighten the mood. "Darling, it's just coffee. The Blue Mountain sounds lovely." But she too had noticed the exchange. The staff were polite, attentive, and flawless in their service, yet they moved with an autonomy that suggested they answered to a higher power, and it wasn't Richard Blackwood. Later that afternoon, they decided to watch a film in the private cinema. Richard attempting to reassert his authority. Browsed the massive digital library. He wanted to show Lana an obscure indie film she had mentioned wanting to see. He scrolled through the vast collection but couldn't find it. He pressed the intercom. "Javier, I can't find a film in the library. I want to stream it." "What's the password for the account?" "The system is a closed loop, sir." Javier's voice came through the speaker. "It's curated directly by the owner. Streaming from external services is disabled for security reasons. Perhaps you might enjoy one of the several thousand other selections available." The polite refusal was like a stone in Richard's shoe. He felt his control, the very thing his entire identity was built on, slipping away in 1,000 tiny increments. The real humiliation, however, came that evening. Before dinner, Richard decided to select a special bottle of wine from the cellar. He had Javier accompany him, determined to pick out something suitably impressive. The cellar was breathtaking, a library of the world's finest vintages. His eyes landed on a bottle of 1982 Petrus. "This one," he declared, pointing at it. "An impeccable choice, sir," Javier said. "Though I must inform you, wines from the owner's private collection such as this one incur a supplemental charge." "Of course," Richard said with a dismissive wave. "Just add it to the bill. As per policy for private collection items, we must charge it at the time of consumption," Javier explained, producing a small, discreet credit card terminal. "If you would, sir." Richard felt a flash of annoyance at the procedural nonsense, but handed over his exclusive Black American Express card. This card had no official limit. He had used it to buy a sports car on a whim. Javier swiped it. The machine whirred for a moment, then beeped. A small red light blinked on the screen. "I'm sorry, sir," Javier said, his face a perfect mask of neutrality. "It appears the transaction has been declined." The words hit Richard like a physical blow. "What? That's impossible. Run it again." Javier ran it again. The same result. "There must be a mistake." Richard snapped, his face flushing with a mixture of anger and embarrassment. "This is my primary card. There's no limit." "Perhaps you would like to try another card," Javier suggested politely. Lana, who had followed them down, watched the scene with a growing sense of unease. Richard fumbled for his wallet, his usual suave demeanor completely gone. He produced a visa, his secondary corporate card. Javier swiped it. Declined. Panic began to coil in Richard's stomach. This wasn't just a technical glitch. It felt targeted. It felt like a deliberate stripping of his power right here in front of Lana. "The systems can be temperamental," Javier said, his voice betraying nothing. "Perhaps we should select a bottle from the estate's main collection. There is a truly wonderful Chateau Margaux from '95. It is, of course, complimentary for our guests." Defeated, Richard could only nod numbly. The word complimentary felt like an insult, a pat on the head for the man who couldn't afford the real prize. They went to dinner, but the taste of humiliation lingered far longer than the exquisite flavors of the food. Richard was quiet, his mind racing. Had his accounts been frozen? Was there a problem at the company? He had no cell service in this remote canyon. He felt disconnected, powerless. Lana tried to salvage the evening. "The Margaux is divine, Richard, much more subtle than the Petrus would have been." But her words of reassurance sounded hollow. She had seen the flash of panic in his eyes, the utter emasculation of the moment. The infallible titan she admired had just been shown to have limits. Later that night, as they lay in the vast bed, a storm rolled in from the ocean, rain lashing against the glass walls. A junior staff member, a young woman new to the estate, knocked lightly on the door. Richard answered it, annoyed at the interruption. "What is it?" The young woman looked flustered. "I am so sorry to disturb you, sir. There was a call at the main gate, an urgent matter. The security guard patched it through to the house line by mistake. The gentleman on the line, a Mr. Finch, was asking to speak with Miss Vance." Richard stared at her. "Miss Vance? There's no one here by that name. You have the wrong room, the wrong guests." "My deepest apologies, sir," the girl stammered, bowing and backing away. Richard shut the door, a cold dread washing over him. Miss Vance. The name echoed in his mind. It was a common enough name, but here. Now it felt like another piece of a puzzle he couldn't comprehend. "Who's Miss Vance?" Lana asked from the bed, pulling the sheets up to her chin. "No one," Richard said, his voice tight. "Just a mistake." But he knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that it wasn't a mistake. It was a message, and it was not intended for him. He was no longer the protagonist of this story. He was merely a guest in someone else's carefully constructed world, and he had the terrible feeling he was about to meet the owner. The final 24 hours at the Serafina estate were shrouded in a thick psychological fog. Richard's bravado had evaporated, replaced by a tense, simmering paranoia. He felt watched not by the discreet staff, but by the house itself. The very air seemed charged with an intelligence that was not his own. He tried to recover his composure, suggesting a game of tennis on the private court. As they played, the estate's integrated sound system, which had been silent until now, began to play music. It wasn't the ambient jazz or pop one might expect at a luxury resort. It was a complex, melancholic piano sonata by Satie. "I hate this kind of music," Richard grumbled, missing a shot. "It's depressing. Can we get something else on?" He looked around for an intercom or control panel, but there was none. The music simply emanated from hidden speakers, a somber soundtrack to his growing anxiety. Lana paused, racket in hand. "It's beautiful, though. So thoughtful." But she too felt the strangeness of it. The music felt personal, like they were intruding on someone's private moment of reflection. Later, while Lana was showering, Richard prowled the master suite like a caged animal. He needed to understand what was happening. He opened the drawers of the bedside table. They were empty, save for a single book tucked in the back of the bottom drawer. It was a slim volume of poetry by Rilke. He opened it. On the flyleaf, in elegant, familiar cursive, was an inscription. To E.V. May you always find sanctuary within these walls. All my love. A.E.V. Eleanor Vance. No, his wife's name was Eleanor Blackwood. Vance was her maiden name, a name he hadn't heard or thought about in years. It had to be a coincidence. But his hands trembled as he put the book back. The A could be anyone. Still a name surfaced from the deep recesses of his memory. Alistair Finch. Eleanor's old family lawyer, a stuffy British gentleman he'd met once years ago at her father's funeral. The name the staff member had mentioned on the phone. The pieces were clicking into place, forming a picture he refused to see. Lana emerged from the bathroom, wrapped in a fluffy white robe. That scent, she said, sniffing the air. It's stronger in the bathroom. The soaps and lotions, peony and blush suede. It's lovely. I feel like I've smelled it before. Richard's blood ran cold. Jo Malone's peony and blush suede. It was Eleanor's signature scent, the one she'd worn for over a decade. He always thought it was pleasant but forgettable, just like he thought she was. Now it was everywhere. The cashmere shawl Lana had found, the toiletries, a faint trace on the linens. It was the scent of his wife. It's just a generic hotel scent, he lied, his voice hoarse. No, Lana said, frowning. It's very specific. A friend of mine wears it, I think. She couldn't place it, but the familiarity was unnerving. The house was not just owned by someone else. It was haunted by a presence, a ghost, whose tastes and preferences dictated everything from the coffee to the music to the very scent in the air. And that ghost was beginning to look terrifyingly like his wife. His mind reeled. How was it possible, Eleanor? His quiet, unassuming Eleanor, who managed household budgets and organized charity bake sales. The woman who needed his help to reset the Wi-Fi router. The idea that she could secretly be the reclusive billionaire who owned this palace of modern art and technology was preposterous. It defied every assumption he had ever made about her. He thought back. Her family had been comfortable but not fabulously wealthy, or so he'd thought. Her father was a university professor. They had a nice house in Connecticut. Nothing that could lead to this. Had she inherited a fortune he never knew about? Or was something else going on? Something far more complex. He remembered her late nights in the library with those dense technical books he'd always dismissed as a quirky hobby. He remembered her occasional vague mentions of a small investment portfolio she managed, which he'd assumed consisted of a few $1,000s in mutual funds. He thought about her complete lack of interest in his business, how her eyes would glaze over when he talked about market caps and leveraged buyouts. He had mistaken her silence for ignorance. What if it had been concealment? The final definitive clue came when he tried to use the desktop computer in the suite's office nook. He wanted to get online to check his company's stock, to feel connected to his world again. The computer was locked. It required a password. Out of a desperate, morbid curiosity, he typed in a word. Peter Dorlard. Access denied. Blackwood. Access denied. He stared at the screen, at the serene background image of a nebula. Then, on a wild, insane hunch, he typed in a word he hadn't used since his wedding day. A password he knew she used for her personal email, a name she'd told him was from her favorite childhood book, Stardust. The screen unlocked. The desktop was clean minimalist. There was only one icon on it, a folder labeled EV Holdings. His hand shaking, he clicked on it. It opened to reveal a labyrinth of subfolders: Quantum Encryption Ventures, Neuro AI Labs, Project Seraphina, Blackwood Capital, Bailout Package. He clicked on the last one. Inside was a single detailed financial document. It was a bridge loan agreement from 8 months ago, a $50 million emergency infusion of capital into Blackwood Capital, preventing it from defaulting on a major bond payment, a default that would have ruined him. The lender was listed as EV Holdings. The loan was signed off by its sole director, Eleanor Vance. The room began to spin. The apex deal, the one he was here celebrating. The deal that had saved his company and his reputation. It had only been possible because of this secret loan. His success wasn't his own. It was a gift, a bailout from the woman he was currently cheating on in the house she owned, paid for by the technological empire she had built in secret while he was dismissing her as a simple housewife. The ghost in the machine wasn't a ghost. It was the architect. He heard a sound behind him. Lana stood in the doorway, her face pale. She had seen the screen. She had read the words, Blackwood Capital, Bailout Package. "Richard," she whispered, her voice trembling. "What is this?" He had no answer. He just stared at the screen, at the digital proof of his own colossal ignorance. At that moment, he heard the distinct sound of a helicopter approaching. It wasn't leaving. It was landing. Javier's voice came through the suite's intercom, as calm and professional as ever. "Mr. Blackwood, please excuse the intrusion." There was a pause. "The owner has arrived." The sound of the helicopter blades faded, replaced by an unnerving silence that was heavier than any sound. Richard stood frozen in the office nook, his reflection a pale, ghostly mask on the dark computer screen. Lana was still in the doorway, her hand covering her mouth, her eyes wide with a dawning, horrified comprehension. The world had tilted on its axis. The luxurious suite now felt like a cage, an elaborate trap designed with a terrifying feminine precision. Every detail that had seemed opulent now felt like a deliberate taunt, the Sati Sonata, the Rilke poem, the very scent in the air. They were all instruments in an orchestra, and the conductor was about to take the stage. Footsteps echoed in the grand foyer below, the sharp, confident click of heels on travertine marble. They were not the soft-soled steps of the staff. These were footsteps of purpose, of ownership. Richard's legs felt like lead, but some primal instinct forced him to move. He walked out of the suite and stood at the top of the grand floating staircase that spiraled down into the main living area. Lana followed a few paces behind, a silent, shaken witness. Below, Javier stood with his back to them, facing the massive front doors. As the doors swung silently open, a figure was framed against the brilliant blue of the late afternoon sky. It was Eleanor, but it was not the Eleanor he knew. This was not the quiet woman in silk pajamas and reading glasses. This Eleanor was transformed. She wore a bespoke, razor-sharp pantsuit of ivory white that radiated power. Her hair, usually in a soft bun, was styled in a sleek, severe chignon. She wore no jewelry except for a pair of diamond studs that caught the light and a simple, elegant watch on her wrist, not a dainty Cartier, but a practical high-tech timepiece. Her face was serene, but her eyes the same soft grey eyes he had looked at for 15 years, now held a glint of polished steel. She was not a wife arriving to catch her husband. She was a queen arriving to survey her domain. "Madame Vance," Javier said, his voice imbued with a genuine deference Richard had never heard. "Welcome home. Everything is in order." "Thank you, Javier." Eleanor's voice was calm, clear, and carried through the cavernous space. It was the same voice she used to ask if he wanted coffee, but here it held an unmistakable ring of command. "You and the staff may take the rest of the day. I will handle things from here." "Very good, madame," Javier said. He turned and, without so much as a glance at Richard or Lana on the stairs, led the rest of the invisible staff away their departure as quiet and efficient as their service. The silence that followed was absolute. Eleanor stood in the center of the room, her gaze sweeping over the space, her space. She took in the art, the furniture, her posture exuding a sense of profound, rightful belonging. Finally, slowly, she lifted her eyes and met Richard's. There was no rage in her expression, no tears, no hysteria. There was something far more terrifying, a cool, dispassionate assessment, like a scientist observing a specimen under a microscope. Richard finally found his voice, a ragged, choked whisper. "Eleanor, what is this? What's going on?" She took a step forward, her heels clicking with unnerving rhythm. "This," she said, gesturing to the magnificent room around her, "is my home. And you, Richard, are a guest who has overstayed his welcome." Lana, from behind Richard, let out a small, strangled gasp. Eleanor's gaze shifted to her, and for the first time, a flicker of emotion crossed her face. Not anger, but a sort of clinical pity. "Miss Rosie," she said, her tone level, "I'm sorry you were brought into this under false pretenses. Your millionaire is not quite the man of substance he purports to be." Lana looked from Eleanor's commanding presence to Richard's crumbling facade. The power dynamic in the room had not just shifted, it had been inverted with the force of a tectonic plate. The man she thought was a king was now just a trespasser. Richard stumbled down a few steps of the staircase. You own this, the house, the company, EV Holdings. The loan, that was you." The questions tumbled out, each one an admission of his own blindness. "Yes," Eleanor said simply. "Vance, my maiden name. It seems you forgot it. I never did. I started a small data encryption firm with the inheritance my father left me. The one you told me to put in a safe, simple index fund. It turns out I have a knack for technology. That small firm became another, and then another. I prefer to work behind the scenes. Anonymity is a valuable asset." She walked over to the bar, the same bar where Richard had arrogantly poured his scotch just 2 nights ago. She didn't pour a drink. She simply ran a hand over the cool marble, her touch proprietary. "You saw me as simple Richard," she continued, her voice never rising yet. Each word landed like a hammer blow. "Domestic. The wife. It was a convenient role. It kept you comfortable. It gave me the freedom to build an empire while you were busy building an ego." She turned back to face him fully. "I knew about Lana. I've known for 6 months. I knew about the trips to New York, the jewelry from Cartier. I knew you booked this house, my house, through a concierge service that my company owns. The fee you paid went directly back into my account. The sheer calculated brilliance of it was breathtaking. He wasn't just caught. He had been curated, managed, and manipulated from the very beginning. The declined credit cards, the specific music, the scent in the air. It was all part of a carefully orchestrated revelation. This wasn't a confrontation. It was a performance, and he was the unwilling star. "Why?" He croaked the single word encompassing a universe of confusion. Why go through all this? Eleanor finally allowed herself a small, mirthless smile. Because, Richard, I could have just divorced you. I could have exposed you quietly. But for 15 years you looked at me, but you never saw me. You underestimated me at every turn. I thought it was only fair that for your final act of betrayal, you should do it in a world that I built on my terms. I wanted you to feel just for a moment what it was like to be the king of the world, before you learned that you were just a court jester in the Queen's castle. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle in the vast, silent room. Now, she said, her voice dropping the last vestiges of warmth and becoming pure, sharp business. We have things to discuss: the divorce, the prenuptial agreement, and the matter of the $50 million loan you owe my company. The world Richard Blackwood had meticulously constructed for himself did not just crack, it atomized. In the space of 10 minutes, he had gone from a master of the universe to a man drowning in a reality he couldn't comprehend. The grand living room of the Serafina estate became a courtroom, and Eleanor was the judge, jury, and executioner. The prenup, Richard stammered, clinging to the last piece of wreckage he could see. We have a prenup. It protects my assets, my company. Eleanor's expression was one of almost academic curiosity. Oh, that document, Alistair and I had a good laugh about that recently. Do you even remember who drafted it, Richard? You handed the task off to a junior associate at your firm, told him to get it done. You were too busy with a hostile takeover to read the fine print. She took a sleek tablet from an alcove and tapped the screen. My lawyer, Mr. Alistair Finch, the man who called for Ms. Vance last night, reviewed it before I signed. He made one tiny, crucial amendment right in the definitions clause. It redefined marital assets to exclude any businesses or holdings registered under a person's premarital name. She looked up, her gaze piercing. At the time, I had none. So you thought nothing of it. But Vance is my premarital name. Everything I have built, EV Holdings, this house, the company that owns the building your office is in, is untouchable. The prenup you thought was your shield is in fact my fortress. Richard's mind struggled to keep up. He felt a wave of nausea. All those years he'd seen her as his dependent. He paid the bills, funded her charities, gave her an allowance for household expenses. The entire time his financial reality was a child's sandcastle next to her mountain of granite. Lana, who had remained frozen on the stairs, finally made her move. This was no longer about a lover's quarrel. This was a financial execution, and she was on the wrong side of the firing squad. She came down the stairs, her face a mask of frantic calculation. Eleanor, Mrs. Blackwood, Miss Vance, she began, her voice unsteady. I had no idea. Richard told me. He led me to believe. Eleanor held up a hand, a simple, elegant gesture that stopped Lana mid-sentence. Ms. Rosie, your arrangement with my husband is of no consequence to me. However, your presence in my home is. I believe a car is waiting for you at the main gate. It will take you to LX. I suggest you don't miss your flight. There was no malice in her tone, just an unshakable finality. Lana looked at Richard, her eyes pleading for him to say something to fix this, to be the powerful man she thought he was. But Richard was a statue of shattered pride, his face ashen. He had nothing. He was nothing, with a final withering look of contempt at Richard. Lana turned and walked towards the door, her dream of a life of luxury dissolving with every step. The heavy door closed behind her. leaving Richard alone with the woman he had married, but never known. Now for the loan. Eleanor continued, her voice as crisp as a financial statement. The $50 million, EV Holdings extended that capital with a personal guarantee from you collateralized against your shares in Blackwood Capital. According to the terms, any breach of a fiduciary duty or act of moral turpitude allows the lender to call the loan in full immediately. She swiped a finger on her tablet. Bringing your mistress to my home for a weekend of infidelity. I believe my board will agree that qualifies. The call notice will be filed at 9 a.m. Monday morning. You will have 30 days to pay it back. In cash. Richard sank onto the edge of a minimalist sofa that probably cost more than his first car. I don't have $50 million in cash. The company doesn't. You know that. It's all tied up in assets. I know, Eleanor said, which means EV Holdings will be forced to take possession of the collateral, your shares, all of them. My acquisitions team is already preparing the paperwork. It will be a smooth transition. I expect your letter of resignation on my desk by noon on Monday. It was the final blow. He wouldn't just lose his money, he would lose his company, his name, his entire identity. She wasn't just divorcing him, she was erasing him. Why, Eleanor? He asked again, his voice cracking with desperation. Why destroy me for an affair? People have affairs every day. For the first time, a genuine raw emotion broke through Eleanor's composure. It wasn't anger. It was a deep, profound disappointment. Destroy you, she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. Richard, you were already destroyed. You just hadn't realized it. This isn't about the affair. That was just a symptom. This is about your condescension, your willful blindness. For 15 years, I tried to share my world with you. I would mention a breakthrough in machine learning, and you would pat my head and say, "That's nice, dear." I'd try to discuss a complex investment strategy, and you'd tell me not to worry my pretty little head about it. She walked towards the massive glass wall, looking out at the ocean. I loved you, Richard. I loved the ambitious young man I married. But he got lost along the way. He was replaced by a caricature, a man who measured his worth in acquisitions and hollow displays of power. You didn't want a partner. You wanted a spectator. The affair with Miss Rosie wasn't the betrayal. The betrayal was the 15 years you spent looking straight through me. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the sound of the waves crashing on the shore far below. Richard looked at this stranger, this titan of industry hidden in plain sight, and saw the full devastating scope of his failure. It was a failure not of business, but of perception, a failure of respect, a failure of love. He had built his kingdom on what he thought was solid ground, never realizing it was all floating on an ocean of her creation. And now the tide had come in. The aftermath was not a storm, but the chilling, absolute silence that follows one. There was no cathartic shouting match, no dramatic pleading. The execution had been too precise for messy emotions. At Eleanor's quiet summons, a sleek black sedan. Part of a fleet Richard now sickeningly assumed was also under her control, arrived to escort him from the premises. He was an intruder, a foreign body being expelled from the system. He was instructed to pack a single overnight bag, an order that underscored his new status as a transient. He walked back into the master suite, a space where he had felt like a god just hours before. Now it felt like a museum of his own failure. The scent of peony and blush-swayed Eleanor's scent seemed to cling to him, suffocating him with the truth of his ignorance. He moved robotically, opening drawers, filled with his expensive, useless things. He picked up his Patek Philippe. The watch he'd so often used to mark his importance, its weight now feeling obscene. He set it down on the polished marble of the nightstand, a silent, pathetic offering to the woman he had wronged. It was a costume piece from a role he could no longer play. His hands shook as he zipped the simple leather duffel, a bag he usually took to the gym, now containing the entirety of his immediate possessions. Eleanor was waiting for him at the grand entrance, a final, unavoidable checkpoint. She stood not as a grieving wife, but as a composed executive facilitating a departure. She held out a slim manila envelope, her movements economical and devoid of sentiment. "These are the divorce papers already filed with the court." She stated, her voice as level as the horizon. "My legal team is efficient, and this is the address of a corporate apartment in the city. The lease is in your name, paid for 6 months. It should be sufficient time for you to arrange your own affairs. After that, you are on your own. My lawyers will only communicate with yours from this point forward." He took the envelope, the paper cool against his clammy skin. He looked at her, truly looked at her, for what felt like the first time. He searched her face for a crack in the powerful facade, a hint of the softer woman he had married, the woman he had taken for granted. He found nothing but a calm, resolute strength that seemed to have been forged in a fire he never knew was burning. "Was any of it real, Eleanor?" he asked, his voice a ragged whisper. "In the beginning?" She held his gaze for a long moment, a flicker of something ancient and sad passing through her eyes, before being extinguished. "The first few years were. I believe they were. But people change, Richard. Or more accurately, they become more of who they were always meant to be. I became a creator. You became a brand. The two are no longer compatible." She gave the slightest of nods. "Goodbye, Richard." With that, she turned her back straight and walked towards the heart of her home, leaving him standing in the doorway. He had no response. He was a footnote in her life, and the chapter was now closed. The drive down the winding cliffside road was a descent into a new kind of hell. He watched the Serafina estate disappear in the rearview mirror, a shining monument to his own colossal stupidity. The weeks that followed were a systematic dismantling of his existence. He sat in a sterile, glass-walled conference room, his mid-level lawyer sweating beside him, as Eleanor's team, led by the impeccably dressed and terrifyingly sharp Alistair Finch, laid out the terms of his surrender. There was no negotiation. The documents were ironclad. The personal guarantee on the $50 million loan was his undoing. He signed away his company, his shares, his legacy with a pen that felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. His social and professional circles evaporated overnight. Men who had once clapped him on the back and called him a genius now had their assistants inform him they were in a meeting. He made a desperate call to Mark Renshaw, a man he'd considered his closest friend, with whom he'd vacationed, and whose son's christening he had attended. The call went to voicemail. The text he sent received no reply. He was radioactive, a pariah in the world that had once worshipped him. The financial press was merciless. They chronicled his downfall in excruciating detail, contrasting his flamboyant, debt-leveraged style with the quiet, surgical brilliance of the mysterious E.V. Holdings. When Eleanor Vance finally revealed herself to be the firm's founder and CEO, the story became a global sensation. Headlines screamed from every screen. The Blackwood implosion, how hubris and a ghost lender toppled an empire. Meet Eleanor Vance, the secret power behind the year's biggest takeover. Richard Blackwood was no longer a visionary. He was the arrogant fool who was outplayed by his own wife. As for Lana Rossi, she became a minor detail, a footnote in the larger narrative of betrayal and comeuppance. She vanished from the art scene, reportedly moving back to Europe, her name forever tainted by her association with a fallen man. Meanwhile, the world eagerly embraced Eleanor Vance. She made her first public address, not at a shareholder meeting, but as the keynote speaker at the Global Technology Symposium in Geneva. She appeared on stage not in a power suit, but in a simple, elegant, dark dress, her presence commanding without a single ounce of theatricality. She didn't speak of profits or market disruption. She spoke of the ethical responsibilities of technological advancement, of funding education, of using quantum computing to solve humanity's greatest challenges. The world was captivated. Here was a leader who spoke not of building bigger walls, but of opening new doors. Months later, Richard sat on a worn vinyl stool in a dimly lit sports bar in a part of Chicago he barely knew existed. The air was thick with the smell of stale beer and fried food. He was nursing a draft beer, a far cry from the vintage Macallan he once favored. On one of the many television screens mounted on the wall, Eleanor's face appeared. She was being interviewed announcing a multi-billion-dollar philanthropic foundation dedicated to advancing STEM education for young women. She was poised, articulate, and radiated a serene confidence that seemed to light up the screen. She was magnificent. A man next to him, a construction worker, by the looks of his dusty clothes, gestured at the screen with his beer bottle. "That Eleanor Vance, huh? She's incredible. Came out of nowhere and changed the whole game. Brains and class. Wonder what kind of idiot man would ever let a woman like that go?" Richard said nothing. The man's casual words were more brutal than any legal judgment. He was that idiot man. He slid a crumpled $10 bill onto the sticky bar top and walked out into the cold anonymity of the city night. A ghost of a man haunted by the shadow of the queen he had mistaken for a pawn. Thousands of miles away on the coast of California, Eleanor Vance stood on the private balcony of her home. The sun was setting, melting into the Pacific in a breathtaking blaze of orange and violet. The evening was quiet, the air crisp with the promise of a new day. Her work for the day was done. She wasn't looking back at the wreckage of her marriage or the man she had been forced to dismantle. Her gaze was fixed forward on the endless horizon. In her hand, she held a tablet displaying the first architectural plans for the Vance Institute for Girls, the inaugural project of her new foundation. This estate was no longer a sanctuary from a life of pretense, but a launch pad for a life of purpose. The gilded cage had been a necessary cocoon, but she had finally emerged, not broken by betrayal, but freed by it. She took a deep breath of the salty air, a world of infinite possibilities, stretching before her, all of them hers to build. That was the story of Richard Lana and the brilliant Eleanor Vance. It's a powerful reminder that the greatest strength can be found in the places we least expect it, and underestimating someone can be the most expensive mistake you'll ever make. Eleanor's journey wasn't just about revenge, it was about reclamation. She reclaimed her name, her power, and her life from a man who saw her as nothing more than a beautiful piece of his collection. She proved that the quietest person in the room is often the most powerful. If you were moved by Eleanor's story of strength and cunning, please hit that like button to show your support. Share this video with someone who loves a story of epic justice, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another tale of secrets, lies, and ultimate triumph. What would you have done in Eleanor's position? Let us know in the comments below. We love reading your thoughts. Thank you for listening.